we did quite a few things outside the grounds. I used to love riding our bicycles. Outside the grounds, we'd go down this very steep hill, and there'd be corn growing on one side, maybe in the vineyards, because Welch's grapes grew in that part of New York State. So there'd be these lovely vineyards, there'd be these lovely cornfields. It's a poor county, but because it's poor, it's more picturesque than many of the counties. There are lots of dairy farming. We used to go horseback riding occasionally. But one of my favorite things was to go on our bicycles, zooming down this hill, and then we turn right at a certain cornfield, and we'd go to the painted bridge. It was a small bridge, and underneath would be these big paintings. Some kids had painted these really lovely scenes of I think there were sunsets and all kinds of activities. And we'd go there, and there was like a ledge. The water came down this ledge, like a little mini waterfall, and the kids would find little crayfish and fish, and they'd just have a whale of a time there in this little backwater. And I don't think anybody ever joined us there. It was like a private little swim hole that we had for years. Those paintings remained there because they were under the bridge, so they didn't get the elements on them, so they remained nice. So that was one thing. And then on the way back, I'd pick wildflowers, or I'd go alone sometimes on my bike, and I'd decorate my bicycle in wildflowers and then put them in vases at home. At least once or twice a week, there'd be a farmer's market. And so we'd buy fresh corn, fresh peaches, everything fresh. So it was very healthy. Let's see, what else did we do? We'd go, I know it. The kids loved going across the lake. So we'd have to take a car, go around the lake through Mayville and down to the other side of the lake to a place called Midway, where they had all kinds of fun things for kids to do. But our favorite was the giant slide. We'd climb to the top, and it would be like a wave, like a great big wave. It was made out of metal, I think, and there were different lanes in it. And you'd take either a piece of canvas or cloth or a piece of, not newspaper, cardboard, and you'd sit on it and you'd go zooming down this thing. You went much faster if you sat on something. If you just went on your bottom, you didn't go that fast. So that was one of the favorite things that we did. And we used to have a birthday party there occasionally. And I remember one birthday party, we took the kids to a place not far from Jamestown. I've forgotten what it's called, but it's of geological interest because it has these fissures in the ground. I don't know what they were caused by, earthquakes or something, these fissures. And one of the fissures was called Fat Man's Misery, because if a fat man got in the fissure, he'd get stuck. So we'd go through these fissures, and I remember we had a watermelon seed spitting contest. Can't remember who won, probably John. Spitting contest. We'd have all the little kids lined up spitting these watermelon seeds. Very elegant. So that was one of the things we did to go to this place. It had a name. I can't remember it now, what the name of this place was.
Panama Rocks.
Panama Rocks. Good for you. Panama Rocks. Yes. Yes. And then the kids on their own would do things, which I think I'll let them describe what they did on their own. We went swimming. Dad at one point bought one of those racing, what are those called? A skiff?
Shell.
A rowing shell. And a rowing shell with a seat that moved backwards and forwards with these long, long oars. And I loved it because occasionally I'd go out early in the morning when there was still a mist on the water, and I'd take the shell and I'd be all alone. All you could hear was the dripping of the water when the oars came out of the water. There'd be a dripping. And I'd be all alone on the lake. I couldn't see anything because I was in this sort of milky vastness. You could occasionally hear a little turtle or a duck something. It was spooky. It was really rather spooky. I did that a few times. That was kind of fun. Then I think Dad donated it to the sports club. So it was a very healthy life. We were there from the end of the school year, which was the end of June. We were there end of June, whole of July, whole of August, right into maybe 1 or 2 days, past Labor Day.
You recall palindrome?
Oh yes, Dad bought a funny little Boston whaler. I think it's the smallest Boston whaler that's made. And we called it palindrome because the license read the same forwards as backwards, and that's what a palindrome is. A man, a plan, a canal, Panama. It reads the same.
The boat looked the same backwards to forwards.
Was that why we called it palindrome? Yeah?
A rowboat.
Oh, maybe.
And it had a little sail.
Yeah, it had a small sail.
Put a motor on it.
Yeah, that's right. And once Dad and I, in the middle of the lake, we sprang a leak. Something happened and we began to sink. So we began to wave to people to save us, and people just thought we were waving to say hello. So they just waved back. So we finally managed to get to the other shore, where, you know, where the midway was, and we had to call Mr. Williams, who was our contractor. He was a man I often called him to help fix something or paint something or whatever. They made a lot of money out of Chautauqua because all these houses were old and you know, some were decrepit. So the local people loved them because they're always repairing something. So Mr. Williams came with his tow truck and he put our little boat on his truck and took us home.
What about memories of just random people from Chautauqua? Think of your children's friends, the different families, your friends.
Yeah, well, the kids got to know lots of people there, maybe even more than I did, because I was sort of into my art and whatever. One family was the Gibbs, Mr. Gibbs, Howard Gibbs. We liked him a lot. He was the head of the Boys and Girls Club. And at one point he had invited Emanuel Axe, who's now well known, but then he was just a young kid. Emanuel Axe and his mother, they were Polish Jews. So I think maybe Emanuel knew a few words in English. His mother didn't know much English. So we were invited anyhow, but Janet Gibbs said, Elizabeth, make sure you talk to the mother because she only speaks Polish. So they invited them and us to a little party because Emanuel Axe came over to, he was already a very good pianist. He came over to study some more piano playing and he became very famous. Emanuel Axe. He's a famous piano player now. So we were there at the very beginning of his career. And so I talked Polish to his mother. And it was fun watching him make his career. What else? Let me think of some other people. We made friends with Walter Handel, the conductor, whose daughter Susan Handel danced in the New York City Ballet. One of our friends was a violinist from the New York Philharmonic. Gosh, I've forgotten his name. He was very nice. He and his wife. We used to invite him quite a lot. I can't remember. Rubenstein. I think his name was Rubenstein. Yeah, not Arthur Rubenstein, obviously. Something Rubenstein. And I once had a party where I invited artists and musicians and people, had a nice mixture of people. Whom else did we? The very interesting woman was, gosh, what's her name? She was a volunteer. She was from Czechoslovakia. She was a volunteer firefighter. She was an artist. Maritza Morgan was multi-talented. She lived there year-round, so we became friends with her. Hadn't thought of her for a long time. She did a lot of postcards and art that was sold in Chautauqua and paintings. And as I said, she was also a volunteer firefighter. My kids, I think, had more friends than I did because they were friends with the kids and then with the parents. So I'll let them talk about their experience in Chautauqua.
Roughly.
I can't remember. I remember the Kennedy assassination very well. Oh, God, I remember the Queen's coronation in England. Isn't that awful? I can't remember where I was for the landing on the moon. I always found the deep sea much more interesting than all the things going on in outer space. I'm like Pascal, the French philosopher who said, "Le silence de ces espaces énormes m'effraie." The silence of those huge spaces scares me, frightens me. And I always felt like that. I was never terribly attracted to knowing what's, the moons of Io, the moons of Jupiter, the circles of whatever, Saturn and all that. I had to sort of force myself to be interested in it. I'm so much more interested in what's in the deep sea. I love programs about the animals, the creatures, the fish, or the wrecks, all the things they find, or maybe bones or Spanish galleons. That fascinates me so much more than outer space. Outer space I find kind of a bit chilling, scary. I find it scary.
So how about Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Reagan,
yes,
any other big...
Yes, well, yes, all those murders. I don't remember exactly where I was when I remember exactly where I was in that train when Kennedy was killed. I can't remember where I was when Martin Luther King was. I mean, we saw it on television, and then Robert Kennedy. I remember, I have these pictures on television in my head, but I can't remember where I was myself exactly. No, that I can't remember.
Anything from the whole Vietnam era? life in
Well, I
Vietnam?
remember being in the park when there were all those demonstrations against the war in Vietnam. And at that point, since we had suffered so much from communism, the Poles had suffered so much from communism, I, in a way, thought it was a good idea to combat communism. So I wasn't anti the war. But there were these demonstrators in the park, and I remember I was on a bicycle, and I had Roland sitting on the little seat on the back of my bicycle. He was, I don't know, what could he have been, 3 years old or something? And there was some kids were trying to pull up a sapling in the park, in Central Park. And Central Park wasn't in terribly good shape in those days. And I was just so incensed, because they were ripping up benches and burning them. And I said, how does ripping up a sapling help end the war in Vietnam? I said, will you please stop it? And they did, you know. I really spoke to them very severely. But, you know, I could have been knocked over and poor Roland would have fallen off the bike, could have been hurt. But I was just incensed that they were doing these stupid things. I said, you know, how does this benefit the anti-war movement, ripping up property? Yeah, the park was in bad shape. I was kind of depressed by that, because I was used to beautifully manicured parks in England. The parks are so well taken care of. And I found Central Park was badly taken care of. There was graffiti on the benches, there was broken things, there was the sheep meadow was like the Oklahoma Dust Bowl. I remember when Nixon landed in a helicopter on the sheep meadow, and there were just swirls of earth going up in the air, because there was no grass. It was like a dust bowl. It was only when the Conservancy was created in 1980-something that the park really got very, very well taken care of, and it still is beautifully taken care of. But when I arrived...
Sorry, what about, let's talk about New York City in general, from your first recollections of it to having lived there to how it is now. What are some memories of it?
Well, I wish we could have had just 1 or 2 years of just being a married couple, because I too soon got pregnant, because Dad wanted a child right away. He had had mumps as a child, and when you have mumps, sometimes it affects the semen. Well, he could have been tested before, I think. He could have had that test. But anyhow, he wanted the proof that he could have a child by having a child as soon as possible, which is fine. I'm glad I had my children when I was young, because then I can enjoy them more.
You wouldn't be shooting this video if you hadn't had a child.
Exactly. So when you're pregnant and then you're a young mother, you see the bad sides. You see the bad air. You're worried about your child. The dangerous there were the civil rights demonstrations. The kids, you know. So you see the bad side. I would have seen the good side of New York if I was just a young married woman. I would have enjoyed going to, you know, the museums, the concerts, the beautiful park, going to the beach occasionally. I would have enjoyed city living more. But once you're a mother, you see things sort of, not through the eyes of a child, but you see what affects the child and his upbringing. And living in an apartment as opposed to having a house with a nice garden, having that artificial thing of having to go into the elevator, go down to the street, walk across the street, you know, wait for the traffic lights to change, all that I found a bit artificial. But we were lucky that we had a nice playground, which became the Adventure Playground, which is just north of the Tavern on the Green, which was very modest in those days, Tavern on the Green. But Robert Moses wanted to build a parking lot. He wanted to destroy the playground and build a parking lot there for the customers of Tavern on the Green. And luckily, there was quite a few influential families, mothers, who were in the public eye. You know, they were with NBC or ABC News or whatever, and they made a big outcry, and they had mothers come and demonstrate with their children and line up their little strollers and not let the bulldozers come. Bulldozers already knocked down a few trees, but they came and they lined up and they wouldn't let the bulldozers destroy the playground. And that's why that playground is there. And then it was turned into the Adventure Playground. So my children were brought up in the Adventure Playground. It's not so adventurous anymore. They've lowered the pyramids. They've put up handrails for handicapped children. In our day, there were these stone, what can I call them, like covered walkways, and the kids would love going through them, even though sometimes they smelled of pee-pee, because I think sometimes homeless people use them as a bathroom, which I didn't find out until the kids told me later. So it was an adventure. that playground. But it's a beautiful playground, and people came from far and wide just to use that playground, because the other playgrounds were still very old-fashioned and didn't have the nice rubberized, coating and sand. We had a lot of sand.
I'm going to interrupt, I want to continue with this whole line of thought, but just while it occurs to me, 9/11 set the stage for your memories of being there for 9/11. Where were you? What was happening? What was life like afterwards?
Oh, well, 9/11, goodness, yeah, that I remember very well. I remember exactly, because I was with my friends, Celia, my great friend from my school in Channing. I was with her husband Simon Preston, her brother Nick, his wife Anne. We had rented a villa in Benabbio in Italy, up in the mountains, the hills of Italy. And we were driving to the coast. There's an American air base called La Spezia. It's just north of Pisa. And we stopped off in La Spezia. We went to a restaurant, and then we went and swam in the sea, in the Mediterranean. And that was exactly the time when the towers were coming down. But we didn't know it, of course. So we were swimming in the sea, then we got in the car and we drove to Pisa. And we had a reservation at a hotel, and as we're claiming our keys, out of the corner of my eye, I see a television, and on this television, it shows towers are falling, and I think, oh, it's some kind of a not surrealistic, but it's a science fiction movie, and I say that to Celia. Oh, it's just probably a science fiction movie, and I hear this Italian say, "No, signora, è davvero. It's really going on." I was horrified, so I got my key. I rushed upstairs to my room and turned on the television, because I remembered that my son John was working for Miramax Films, and that his office was not far. It was just north, I think, of where the towers were. And I thought, oh my gosh, with his curiosity, he'll rush out with a camera to take films, and he'll get caught in that awful cloud of asbestos, that terrible cloud of pollutants that swept north, swept in all directions, I suppose. And so that really scared me. So luckily, Simon somehow managed to get, how did he do it? He somehow managed through London to contact Andy's company. Andy was working for Lazard Frere, and somehow Andy conveyed the message through the London branch, through Simon to me, that my boys were okay. That nothing had happened, because that really worried me, that you'd get caught up in that cloud. Yeah, so that I remember very well. Yeah, and so we were, and ironically, there we were in Pisa, in a town where there's a tower that's like this, that's been threatening to fall for 400 or 500 years, and it's still there. And our towers were only there from the 70s, So that was, I felt bad that I wasn't in New York. I felt that I should have been in New York. I should have been part of this tragedy and maybe done something, helped in some way. In fact, I couldn't get a flight out for a while because people were trying to get back. It took me a while before I could book a flight to get back to America.
Were you able, when do you recall visiting Ground Zero?
Not for quite a while. Yeah. Not for quite a while. I'm trying to remember the first time. No, I never really saw it in its devastated state. No, I think they were encouraging people not to, because they still had people working there, and no, I didn't go to Ground Zero. I was there just recently, a month or two ago. I went there, and for the first time I saw what they've done now with that, what do they call those fountains, the infinity edge of those fountains, and the squares where the footprints of the towers were. Yeah, I was there. And I went to an Irish pub, which was also covered in the dust from the towers when they fell. I saw pictures of it in this Irish pub. And yeah, it's quite a tourist draw now. Yeah. Yes, okay. Let's see, before the divorce came to an end, it lasted 9 years. And I had remained in Bronxville in two friends' houses, and then John and I took an apartment on West 69th Street in a brownstone on the 3rd floor, walk up in a brownstone. And finally, when I got, after 9 years, I got a divorce settlement, and I got some money. I was able to buy a co-op, and I was lucky because it was close to the bottom of the market. So I was able to buy a nice one-bedroom co-op at 40 West 77th Street, apartment 4C, looking south across the gardens of 76th Street. So a nice view with trees and people's gardens, and a very pleasant, very bright apartment, lots of sunshine because the bedroom and living room face south. And then I have some windows going east, yeah, kitchen and bathroom. So I moved there, and what was your question?
Historical Society.
Oh yes, and at the end of my block is the New York Historical Society on Central Park South. It's a neoclassical building, Central Park South between 76th and 77th. So I became a member. Oh, wait a minute, no, it was closed because they had a lot of financial difficulties, that's right. So I became a member and then it closed. But then I said, look, when you reopen, I'd like to, work as a volunteer. And they were looking for volunteers, but I even went, before they actually reopened, I worked for them analyzing volunteers, the papers that they made out, the hours, the time, and I could never do it now, but I made these labels. I somehow printed them, labels with people's names, and then wrote down, what times they were available. So I did that for Grady Turner, yeah, nice guy. And then it reopened, I became a volunteer. A docent, volunteer guide. And we were trained, we were given lots of information. I spent hundreds of dollars on American history books because most of my history was European history. I went to school in England and in Switzerland, so I learned European history and just a little bit of American history. So I had to do a lot of research, which was fun. And for 17 years, I worked there as a docent, as a guide, until about 4 years ago, I think. Now they're much richer, they have much more money, they've modernized everything, but they were much more generous when they were poor.
What are some of the shows that you were a docent for that stand out?
Oh yes, a big show. I think this was our opening show. It's 200 years of American history. We have like 6 million objects. We have furniture, we have sculptures, we have lots of
Don't touch the microphone.
We have furniture, we have portraits, we have silver, we have all kinds of things, and documents and maps and books. And what was the question?
Shows that you curated, like Audubon.
Oh yes. So what we did was we had this show called 200 Years of American History. We chose 2 objects for every year that America's existed. So like 17, I think maybe we started with 76, I'm not sure, or with 81. At one point, yes, we had Washington's a set of his false teeth, and maybe we had a set of his Cincinnati china, or we had his cot. Then Benjamin Franklin, we had his glasses. And with everything, there's a story attached to everything. So it isn't, you're not just talking about his glasses, you're talking about Franklin and what he did for America, and lightning and electricity and all that business. So that was a very good show. And one of the things I did in rhyming couplets, I did like a treasure hunt for kids where they had to go from one object to another and follow the clue, and then at the end there'd be some little prize for them. And I remember doing one about the wounded knee, something about the body parts. It was kind of funny. I'll have to show it to you one day. I don't know if I'd be able to do it again. But it was, as I say, rhyming couplets going from one thing to another. So it was American Indians, it was the British, it was the French, it was, everything. 200 years of American history. We have a fantastic collection of Hudson River School paintings, Thomas Cole, Usher B. Durand. We have a lot of 19th century paintings, a lot in their original frames. We have a presentation china. We have the service that was presented to Admiral, oh dear, I haven't thought about this, so it'll take me a while to think of him. Oh gosh, the guy who opened up Japan. Japan was very sort of xenophobic and didn't want to open itself up for trade. And this American, I forgot his name. He went with these ships, his black ships, and he pulled into the harbor, I suppose, in Tokyo, and he was accepted by the shoguns, but he didn't know that under the floor of where he was accepted, there were these samurai waiting with swords in case things went wrong in this meeting between the Americans and the Japanese. They were to rush out and kill the Americans. And Admiral... No, 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 that's much later. Oh, it'll come to me. Oh gosh, it's the first time I've forgotten his name. It's ridiculous, I've forgotten his name. It'll come to me. He came out in his beautiful uniform with two big African-American sailors with all their gold, whatever, and he was carrying a little casket with a message from President, I think it was Millard Fillmore at that point, the American president, because they wanted to open up Japan. They also didn't want the Japanese capturing ships with American sailors. You know, they wanted to have some kind of a pact. But Japan was sort of xenophobic and wanted to keep its distance. Well, this meeting finally broke through the Japanese reticence, and they began to allow American ships to come and trade with them, whatever. And the New York Chamber of Commerce, in gratitude to this admiral, gave him this huge service of spoons and forks and platters, and we have a lot of that. So we have a big display of silver. And one of my favorite pieces of silver is an ice cream dish that was made for a family called Mackay, or Mackey. I've forgotten where the accent goes. John Mackey. He was a not very wealthy guy of, I think, Scottish origin, who married a seamstress of Irish origin. And he was lucky enough to buy the claim of it was in Nevada. There was a silver claim called, again, I didn't know I'd be talking about this, I've forgotten the name of this claim. It was a huge seam of silver that was discovered, and he bought it out from the guys who discovered it and made a fortune. And it sort of went to his wife's head. She'd been this poor little seamstress, and it went to her head, and she wanted this beautiful service made for her out of this silver. So I think he sent a ton of it or something to Tiffany in New York. And for 2 years, about 200 workmen labored on this service. And we have this ice cream dish, and it's got the Scottish thistle on it, and it's got the Irish shamrock, and it's got the feet are made out of elephants' trunks, because the elephant was a very popular motif in those days. And so they have these elephant trunks, and the inside is gilded. It was an ice cream dish. But the piece was like, I think, 2,000 pieces. And it was sent to France, to Paris, in maybe 80-something. There was a famous exposition, an exhibition in Paris, and it was sent. And finally the French had to admit that because the French were rather snobbish about anything made in America, you know, sort of inferior. They had to admit that the Americans knew their stuff. I mean, this service, I mean, it had separate little forks to pick up a piece of celery. It had something separate to pick up an olive. 2,000 pieces. And great big serving dishes and little teeny dishes. An incredible service, yeah.